what's the unique aspect about digital ID that makes it different?
The unique thing about digital ID is that it's held by a database that will speak to multiple areas of government. The digital ID serves to do nothing other than to identify who you are, and then that is used for certain permissions and to demonstrate certain entitlements. It becomes a permit for living. At the moment in Britain, you don't have to have a passport. What's quite disturbing about Starmer's Brit card is that it will be mandatory, that every single person here will have to have one.
What is digital ID then in the most basic sense, and what is the government actually proposing?
A digital ID is basically an identifier, a unique identifier for you, backed up by a government-held database. The government has already said that it will be biometric in nature, so our understanding is that will rely on a facial biometric. So that's like a digital map of your face that's as uniquely identifying as a fingerprint or DNA. So already it's going to be very, very sensitive data held by the government, kind of credential that will be used, as they are saying, in the first instance for a right to work check. But everything points to, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, the many, many other ways in which the government will end up using digital ID.
And just to put it in context, how is that different to having, for example, a biometric passport or a driving license, a modern driving license? I mean, some countries issue biometric driving licenses too. So what's the unique aspect about digital ID that makes it different?
Well, the unique thing about digital ID is that it's held by a database that will speak to multiple areas of government. So a passport is a document that you buy that then you can use for travelling. For example, it has very specific use cases. The digital ID serves to do nothing other than to identify who you are. And then and then that is used for certain permissions and to demonstrate certain entitlements. And this is really what I think is at the heart of people's worry about a digital ID, is that it becomes a permit for living. And we're a country that has never had permits for members of the public to go about our daily lives. We don't need a kind of digital pass to just live our lives, but that's what this very much looks like. At the moment in Britain, you don't have to have a passport.
No.
And actually there are millions of people who don't have a passport. What's quite disturbing about Starmer's Brit card is that it will be mandatory, that every single person here will have to have one. And that's whether you're a national or not, because of course, if you're here on a visa, then you'll need one as well. So it's basically, it will be a database of supposedly, or in reality, it won't be at all. It's a database of everyone in the country, I suppose, who's willing to kind of sign up and get this supposedly mandatory digital ID, and that will lock into multiple areas of government, and I think will become a sprawling surveillance system.
Yeah. I mean, from my experience in government, having worked in Downing Street, once you come up with one of these ideas nominally for a specific policy use case, the rest of government just morphs around it and starts to use it for endless numbers of applications. So the Labour government's coming out at a time when it's under huge pressure over the issue of immigration. That's the kind of context. And it's saying, we need to introduce digital ID because we need to make sure that people aren't working illegally in the UK. So that's kind of been their nominal, ostensible position. But in reality, you can see a path, can't you, where that digital ID might be applied to all kinds of use cases that are nothing to do with checking your right to work. So for example, it would be an immediate read across into, would you need to have this to access NHS services, for example? Would you need to have it to access welfare benefits? Would you need to have it to prove your identity in education or in other areas of life? What is there in terms of safeguards that the government's proposed to kind of stop that mission creep?
Well, trust us is the safeguard so far. And then just hours later, after saying this is only for right to work checks, various ministers have come out and talked about all the other ways in which it's going to be used. So if we track how this has unfolded, right, Thursday night, the government said started briefing out that they were going to introduce a mandatory digital ID. Lisa Nandy was sent out on question time. She had no idea what it was going to be used for. There was no information, and it was all very threadbare. Friday, the whole thing was dampened down. It's just for right to work checks. It's just, this is going to help us protect our borders and tackle illegal immigration. These are all the messages that government was giving out. Literally just hours later, the government published a fact sheet online about digital ID and what it would be used for that said, I quote, "In time, a digital ID could be used for education, nurseries, banking, benefits, and listed off a reel of other purposes that a digital ID will be used. Of course, it didn't say that those uses will be mandatory, but they don't need to, because it's quite obvious the direction that has been taken. And I'm afraid it's not really going to wash for government to try and paint people who are worried about that as like swivel-eyed lunatics. That's just the reality. They're already setting out the multiple ways in which it can be used. Darren Jones, who works very closely with Keir Starmer, said that a digital ID will be the bedrock of the modern state. You had a junior minister out this morning saying that he actually said in a live interview, we're not going to boil the ocean now. He was basically saying not going to come out and talk about the multiple ways in which it would be used for now because the public would be sceptical, he said. But there are multiple ways in which a digital ID can be used in the future. And again, they're talking about entitlement to benefits. DWP, Secretary for Work and Pensions, has also said in the days after this announcement that it will be used to root out benefit fraud, etc. You have to also look at this in the context of other things that are happening under the Starmer government. They've just introduced legislation for mass bank spying, which is to automate surveillance of people connected to welfare payments, bank statements, to flag potential criteria that could potentially look like fraud. Then you've got live facial recognition cameras, which obviously are seeking to identify us in real time when we're on the streets. A digital ID clearly plugs into some of those policy areas. You've also got the Online Safety Act, which means that increasingly people have to identify themselves online and have age ID checks. So, you know, it would actually be irrational to think that a digital ID ever would stay as just for a right to work check, because of course the pressure will be, why aren't you checking people's digital IDs in XYZ scenarios and for all these other reasons?
Sure. And I actually just pulled up the explainer that you talked about. It's published on gov.uk on the 26th of September, so just a few days ago. And actually under what will the digital ID do? This is the government explaining it themselves. There's the last bullet point. It actually says streamline verification processes across private sectors too.
Yes.
By enabling digital checks and efficient verification when doing things like opening a bank account or proving your age. So it's not only the public sector applications. You know, there'll be people on the sort of authoritarian wing or leaning kind of sentiment on the right who say, well, it's fair enough for the DWP to check whether somebody's a benefit fraudster. We want to bring down welfare abuse. However, would they be so happy with the same technology being in the hands of a relationship between the government and the private sector, where, for example, something that you completely volunteer for, like your supermarket loyalty card or your library card, suddenly becomes connected to your digital ID?
Well, exactly. And also, you know, there will be a huge amount of pressure on from within the government or outside to say, you know, you've used the digital ID to open a bank account, you use it to do your tax return. Isn't it only fair that you link the two and that you can have the taxman in the bank account, or see, you know, basically the digital ID becomes the kind of a barcode for the individual, and a portal for a huge amount of information about them. And that's why those of us who have always cautioned against digital ID have, I'm afraid, never bought the argument that it's just about, it's a sole identifier that's just for you. That's more like what a passport is. That's more like what, you know, when you have a physical identity document, you use it, you have one or two uses for it. When you're talking about a database that links with multiple areas of of government and the private sector, it's very, very likely that a lot of that data is going to be stored and processed and hoarded and then made accessible to a lot of other people. You've also got now so much legislation around anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism in banking and finance that applies to everyone. Again, another kind of mass surveillance framework. Well, the argument will be, if you're using a digital ID to sign up for a bank account, why can't the government just keep that door a little bit open so we can keep running those checks?
Let's focus in on Labour. You mentioned Darren Jones, who's now in this kind of super souped up advisory role to Keir Starmer, very influential Labour minister, but also kind of running Number 10. He's reported in the Telegraph to have said in private that his dream is to turn the government basically into a Monzo app. Now, nothing against Monzo or any other banks, but what he's saying there is he wants to turn the whole functionality of the state into a kind of modern digital enterprise. What's the difference in moral and philosophical terms between, a citizen who wants to have a digital bank and applies for it and uses it, to the state being able to do it?
Well, Darren Jones has always been really pro-tech.
Right.
And I suppose it's good to have some forward thinking in government, but it has to be realistic as well. And I think for us not to get worried that we could be sliding towards some kind of tech dystopia, we need to see a good dose of reality in sometimes how ministers talk about these issues. Likewise with the digital ID, nothing wrong with a digital ID per se if people have a choice over it. But when you start hearing things like mandatory, it gets really, really worrying. And I think likewise with some of the things that have happened within government, the one login being an example, which is really it could well be the backdrop for the digital ID. So it's the idea that you have one login, one credential you use to access all of your government services.
Yeah.
We made the case to the government that you do need to protect and legally protect an offline option for people. Mm-hmm. It's really, really important. It's important for choice, but it's also important for equality, because there are millions of people in the country who aren't online, can't use computers. Even people in my own family, my parents are not people that are comfortable using the internet and I don't know, smartphones and stuff.
Anecdotally, I know older people who are friends with my family who, they let their kids and their grandkids do their online shopping because they can't even do their online shopping, and they don't want to engage with that. And we've seen all of these social realities played out, for example, through the pandemic, where actually people did need to rely on non-online, non-traditional, sort of non-modern forms of communication. Is there something here about the government just assuming that everybody is digitally literate? Because I think if you look at the stats, actually 1 in 10 people in the UK doesn't actually have a smartphone. It's not as, it might be universal for every Labour minister who goes to work in London and, spends their time in metropolitan areas, but it's not necessarily the case everywhere.
Absolutely. It's very much Westminster bubble thinking that doesn't really connect with the real world. And that's one of many reasons that people are panicking about the digital ID announcement. At Big Brother Watch, we had our phones ringing and lots of emails coming in from members of the public saying, but I don't use a smartphone. I don't know what to do. Am I going to lose my job? Can you explain what's going to happen? A real genuine panic from people who would just really struggle to use and carry an app and be scanning in QR codes, on a daily basis.
A lot of people anecdotally kind of say that this is an un-British thing to do. I think it's right that there's only been mandatory ID in the Second World War in the UK, and national identity cards as they were eventually scrapped after that. What is it that's culturally alien about digital ID, specifically in the UK context? Because advocates will say, well, it works really well in Switzerland or it works really well in other places, but what is it culturally about the UK that makes it such an odd concept?
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. It is un-British. The idea of a mandatory digital ID is completely un-British. And it's one of the most baffling things about Keir Starmer introducing this idea during a speech about patriotic renewal, because what he really showed is that he has a total misunderstanding of British values and how important liberalism is to us as a country. I think it's partly steeped in our history. As you say, this is the first time we've had if it goes ahead, it's the first time that we'll have had a mandatory national ID card system since the Second World War. The system that we had during the Second World War was for national service and rationing. But of course, it lingered. It stayed after the war. And it ended up being used by over 39 government agencies. And it was used for random police checks. And it was even used for the collection of parcels. So it became a kind of catch-all, which is why I say, again, it's not really enough for the government to say, oh, it's mad to say that it's going to be used for other things other than this one specific use purpose we're selling it on. You're mad conspiracy theorists. I'm afraid it's not true. It's just an informed and historically informed position to say that this inevitably will spiral. And it was a cleaner who was stopped in the 50s by the police for speeding. And the police officer said, I want to see your ID card. And he said, no, I'm a liberal and I'm against this sort of thing and I don't like the ID card. There was a legal challenge, which he won. And it was the Churchill government that then scrapped the national ID cards. And we've always had a kind of revulsion to them, I think, ever since. I think it's something to do with our common law system as well. The fact that we have the idea deep-seated in all of our consciousness, whether we always think about it or not, of the freeborn Englishman, the idea that just by virtue of birth on this soil, we have a set of rights and freedoms, and we are not to be interfered with by people in authority unless we've done something wrong and incurred on someone else's freedoms. Otherwise, basically, leave us alone. And an ID card turns that presumption on its head and says that actually at all times you're accountable to authority, that you have to carry something that feels very much like a permit for existence, and that you have to then show it anytime you want to access services and authorities that are supposed to work for you. So it's very disempowering, and it's bureaucratic. It's Starmer all over, really. And by making it mandatory, it's very oppressive. I think the other reason that it feels that it has created such a backlash is that it's so obviously not about right to work checks, and it's so obviously not about stopping the boats and about immigration. I think the public don't like being lied to. So you can't really sell something as being patriotic when you're treating the British public like we're idiots.
There's been a huge backlash. I mean, anecdotally, there are a couple of petitions going. Big Brother Watch is running a really good campaign. I think the petition that can kind of force a debate in Parliament has more than 2 million signatures now, which is a very quick uptake of that petition against digital ID. Why do you think it's touched such a nerve at the moment? And I mean, in all practical terms, it looks like the government's going to fail to get this across the line, doesn't it? Certainly before the next election, which is what they're stating they would like to do.
Yeah, this is a phenomenal backlash. Obviously, at Big Brother Watch, we run petitions and we run campaigns. Over 2 million on a official government petition, I think, hasn't happened for at least 5 or 6 years. It's phenomenal, and I think it will prove to be one of the biggest political mistakes of Starmer's premiership. I think part of the reason for that, again, is the fact that people, not only does it speak directly to our liberal values, and it just respects those values, but I think people feel lied to. And I think that there's been a growing issue in this country with mistrust in politics and of politicians. And in fact, that's what Starmer's speech was about on Friday, wasn't it? The speech about patriotic renewal. He was talking about the politics of grievance, and basically built up this caricature of working class people as disillusioned by manufactured grievances about, mistrust of elite in politics. And then he slams down on the table, but you're going to all need digital ID cards to stop the boats. And I think that millions of members of the public have said, don't take the piss, basically. It's quite obviously a lie, and we're not stupid, and don't force us to enter into this system we don't want to be a part of and that there's absolutely no purpose for. And I do think it will fail, but it might be, I don't want to be complacent about that as well. We really, really, really need people to back Big Brother Watch's campaign and to stand up for themselves and to say no to this. I think it will fall, but I don't know whether it will fall in Parliament. Given the numbers that Labour have, and likewise Blair's ID cards, the Identity Card Act did pass and came into law, but it's just that the scheme never actually got off the ground.
Yeah.
The question then will be, because this will fail at some point, I think we agree about that, how much time and money will be wasted along the way. I think Blair's ID cards ended up costing about £5 billion, which is phenomenal.
At a time when every public pound of money is really squeezed and the fiscal position is really challenging for the Chancellor ahead of the budget, it seems just to set this hair running as a scheme in government, and to, it's going to have a quite a significant budget allocated against it, even to get the preparatory work off the ground.
Yeah.
I think it's being run by DSIT, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology at the moment. And DSIT put out a letter actually to all parliamentarians about it with very few details. So it sounds like the process in government is almost being launched on the rest of government from Starmer's announcement as a bit of a surprise as well. There'll be a lot of competing views in government as well about whether it's a good idea. So Whitehall departments will also have their own views about whether they actually want to use this and what functionality and tools they want to include under the digital ID program. It will be a real feeding frenzy because the Ministry of Defence, for example, or the Treasury or the DWP will want completely different things from the program. Let's come on to the issue of security. So we're talking in a week where Jaguar Land Rover can't make any cars because it's been the victim of a hack. Marks and Spencer has been the victim of a big cyber attack. There's a kind of context globally of increasing cyber hostility to the UK, which we're constantly told about by the officials who are responsible for security, the kind of constant chorus that things are more challenging than ever for UK cybersecurity. And then the government comes in and says, well, we're going to create an enormous database that will have all of this personal sensitive information about us on. Is there any way that can ever be secure?
No. And I think, a lot has been made in the past few days of look to these other countries that use digital IDs and doesn't all work perfectly there. But often the failures are left out of that story. If you look at Estonia, for example, the world's first digital government, they've got, a national digital ID scheme that they have to use for everything, including voting, which actually is in the DSIT, in the government webpage about our digital ID as well, that you could use it for voting. But even if you look at Estonia, which has you can't really compare the UK to Estonia, of course. They've got a very small population and, lots and lots of differences. But their digital identity system had a massive security flaw, and 760,000 people lost access to services because they couldn't use their digital ID. If you look at digital ID failings in India, for example, millions of people have been adversely affected. Sometimes there have been a number of deaths attributed to digital ID issues when people couldn't prove their credentials to get access to basic necessities. So around the world, we see horror stories about digital ID systems and the security risks. And I think putting that kind of target over Britain's head at this moment in time, when already we're in a very, we live in an environment of cyber hostility, and the country can really be brought to its knees by cyber attacks. If we enroll directly every individual member of the public into a treasure trove of very sensitive information about them, then there will be a target on that, and the fallout could be incredibly serious. It would be something that we inevitably would face at some point, that there would be a serious issue with it.
it seems incongruous to me to, on the one hand, constantly be told by the government that cybersecurity is a pressing issue and we all have to take extra steps to improve our own cybersecurity, and kind of being lectured on it by the authorities, and then to turn around and sort of create the number one target for any hostile state or independent hacker to kind of go after, because you can see an environment where there'll be a trade in, for example, digital ID, and create an online black market for them. So, just as there is with fake passports or fake driving licenses, even if you make the technology very sophisticated, there are ways in which you could trade it illegally, for example. So, and then you actually create a new route for people to defraud the state.
Yeah. And with such sensitive information like biometric information as well, the risk with that is if if somebody gets a hold of your biometric information without your permission, it's not like a password. You can just go and change it. You can't change your face. Like you can't change your fingerprint or your DNA. And so it really, really is very, very risky indeed. And many cybersecurity experts have come out in recent days and said, you would expect much more thinking to have been done about what this might look like, how it would be protected, and all of that's missing. And that's just the kind of national security end of the worries about security over digital identity database. But I'd also be really worried about access control. Like, who can dip into your record?
Yeah.
And how would you ever really protect that? Then you've got the fact it's on your phone. So, if your kid is going out with their digital ID on their phone, does that suddenly make it a target for theft? Is it now an identity theft target? And also the fact that what's envisaged for the digital ID is that it's for civilian checks, right? It's not like this is just something that you have to present to state authorities, but also something that you show your boss, something you show your landlord, inevitably next, something you show the bank.
It could be something that you show the supermarket or the landlord, the pub landlord, in theory.
Absolutely, to get your pint, to prove your age, something you have to show your social media company to sign up for an account because they want to have age ID these days. So really it's envisaged to have this digital credential being shared in lots and lots and lots of places. Done badly, the security risks of that would be phenomenal. And let's not forget as well, it's not just these private sector cybersecurity attacks we've had in recent weeks, but the Ministry of Defence has been plagued by cybersecurity attacks. I think if the MOD can't protect data, very well-established machine, the Starmer's sudden invention of a whole new system, with apparently no areas of government that have been planning for this, and they're saying it's going to be implemented by 2029. No, it's really, really alarming.
Big Brother Watch has written a really interesting report called Checkpoint Britain that we'll link to. And you've got in there some of the history of the cybersecurity of the British state when it's tried to put together these kind of systems before. And you mentioned the government's One Login program. That's been the subject of cyber attacks and hostility online. It's kind of inevitable, isn't it, that programs like these become the targets for hacking. But with such a huge database, given that we know how weak government cybersecurity has been, it just looks like an obvious risk.
I think this is the thing. I think this is the issue that one of the issues that fatally damaged Blair's ID cards, wasn't it, in the noughties? That, if I remember correctly, there was I think a CD that was left on a train that contained hundreds of thousands of pieces of data, and the government just lost the argument on security in a day, really. And I think that is important for people to remember.